3 years of marriage without a single touch, until the millionaire finally chose to claim the woman who was already his and found himself falling harder than he ever expected. Before the story begins, drop a comment telling us where you're reading from. And when you reach the end, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, let's begin. Emily had spent 3 years as the wife of William Anderson, the most coveted and ruthless CEO in the city. And in all that time, he had looked straight through her as though she simply did not exist. 50 words, perhaps fewer, were all they had exchanged in the entirety of their marriage. She was a piece of a puzzle she had never asked to be part of. Her family had been drowning in debt. The Andersons had needed William to take a wife. And so the arrangement was made, cold and clean as a contract. Every morning, Emily descended to the kitchen at 6 o'clock sharp. William never appeared before 6:15, which left her precisely 15 minutes to eat and vanish before their paths crossed. It was a ritual built not on comfort but on avoidance, quiet, hollow, and tinged with a pain she had learned to carry in silence. But that morning was different before it even began. William was already coming down the stairs. Emily shot to her feet, instinct pushing her toward the door, but then his voice stopped her cold. "Emily!" She turned slowly. He stood at the base of the stairs, immaculate in his pressed suit, those sharp blue eyes cutting straight to her. It was the first time in months he had spoken her name aloud. "Yes," she answered, carefully smoothing the surprise from her voice. "Do you have something suitable to wear to a corporate event?" The question came out flat, impersonal, the tone of a man addressing an employee rather than a wife. Emily blinked. "I don't understand. It's a simple question. Do you own a dress appropriate for accompanying the CEO of Anderson Enterprises to a gala dinner?" Her heart lurched in her chest. In 3 years, William had never once brought her into his public world. Not a single event, not a single introduction. "Why are you asking me this?" she said, and surprised herself with the steadiness in her voice. William studied her for a beat, as though truly registering her presence for the first time. "Because you're coming with me. Tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. "But why?" "You never." "Business reasons." He cut her off without blinking. "I need to project the image of a stable family man. You are my wife, at least on paper." The words landed like the flat side of a blade. Emily felt heat rise to her face, but she kept her chin level and her spine straight. "And if I don't want to go?" William raised one eyebrow, visibly caught off guard by the resistance. "That's not an option, Emily. It's a duty. Duty." She repeated the word with quiet bitterness. "Like everything else in my life, right?" Something crossed his face then, fleeting, unreadable, almost like remorse. And then it was gone so quickly she wondered if she had invented it entirely. "This event matters," he said. "International investors. $1 million contracts. You need to look presentable." Emily lifted her chin. "Presentable?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. "You don't even know who I am, William. 3 years, and you never once thought to find out." "I know enough." "Do you?" She took a step toward him, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Then tell me, what's my favorite color? What did I study? What do I do with myself during all the hours you spend pretending I don't exist in this house?" Silence stretched between them. "That's what I thought." Emily exhaled slowly. "I'll attend your event, Mr. Anderson, but not out of duty. I'll go because after 3 years of being invisible, I find myself curious about the world you chose instead of me." She walked past him and out of the kitchen, her head held high, each step deliberate and unhurried. William remained where she left him, watching her climb the stairs, and for the first time in 3 years, he truly saw the woman he had married. There was a quiet elegance to the way she moved, even dressed simply. Strength lived in her posture. Dignity radiated from the set of her shoulders. How had he never noticed any of it before? Upstairs, Emily sank onto the edge of her bed, her pulse racing. Tomorrow night, for the first time in their marriage, she would stand beside William Anderson in public as his wife. As Emily Anderson, was she ready for whatever that might set in motion? Downstairs, William stood motionless in the kitchen, aware of something unfamiliar pressing against the walls of his chest, a feeling he couldn't name and wasn't sure he wanted to. Emily stood before her mirror for the 10th time, smoothing the front of her navy dress. It was simple, tasteful, and elegant, the only formal piece she owned. She had bought it years before the marriage, back when she had still believed her life might include evenings worth dressing for. Now it hung with a quiet history she preferred not to think about. At exactly 7, she descended the staircase. William was already in the living room, his black tuxedo faultless, his posture that of a man who had never once questioned his place in a room. When he saw her, something shifted, barely perceptible, a pause where there should have been none. "You look," he said, "appropriate." That was all, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than they needed to. The car carried them through the city in unbroken silence. Emily kept her gaze on the passing lights, steadying herself. 3 years of near invisibility, and now she was about to walk into a room full of powerful strangers as the wife of the most influential CEO in Los Angeles. "Remember," William said as they pulled up to the Grand Beverly Hotel, "you are Emily Anderson. Smile, stay polite, and don't discuss business." "Understood." Emily's voice was even. "Be a decorative piece and keep quiet." A flash of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face and disappeared just as fast. The ballroom was a study in wealth and influence. Businessmen, investors, and socialites clustered in polished formations across the floor. Emily felt like an imposter stepping into a world she had been deliberately kept from. But she stood straight, channeling the effortless poise she had absorbed from rare observations of her mother-in-law. William, a tall, silver-haired man, approached, extending a hand with a wide smile. "I've been looking forward to meeting the elusive Mrs. Anderson." "Richard Thompson," William said, his tone formal. "My wife, Emily." Richard took her hand and brought it briefly to his lips. "The pleasure is genuinely mine. I'm an international investor, European markets primarily." "The pleasure is mine as well," Emily replied, her smile natural and unhurried. "Your wife is a delight, William," Richard said, his eyes warm with admiration, "and considerably more beautiful than any photograph does justice." Emily's brow furrowed slightly. Photographs? She had never posed for anything as William's wife. Not once. "Do you speak any other languages, Emily?" Richard asked, his curiosity openly engaged. "French and Spanish, both fluently." Richard's eyes lit up. "Magnifique. I've actually been searching for someone to assist with contracts in South America. Would that interest you at all?" "Emily doesn't work," William said, cutting in before she could answer. "What a waste," Richard murmured, his gaze never leaving her. "A woman with intelligence and beauty should be allowed to use both." Emily felt the warmth of genuine recognition, rare and precious after so long. "I'd be glad to help," she said, meeting William's warning look and holding it. "Wonderful. Dinner tomorrow evening to discuss the details." "She's busy," William replied. "Actually," Emily said, "I'm not. I'd be happy to have dinner with you, Mr. Thompson." Richard smiled broadly. "Excellent. I'll collect you at 8. The moment he stepped away, William's hand closed around Emily's arm, harder than necessary, his voice low and tight. "What do you think you're doing? Having a civilized conversation. You might consider trying it sometime. You're not having dinner with him." Emily pulled free. "And why not? You said it yourself. I'm only your wife on paper." "On paper, I can do as I please." William stared at her, something dangerous simmering behind his eyes. "You're my wife. Since when has that mattered to you?" For the remainder of the evening, William didn't leave her side. Not once. Every time Richard drew near, William materialized beside her like a sentinel, possessive and entirely inconsistent with 3 years of practiced indifference. It was baffling. It was infuriating, and Emily couldn't quite look away from it. In the car on the way home, the silence had a different weight than usual. "You're not having dinner with him," William said again. "Yes, I am," Emily replied. "Why?" "To get under my skin." She turned to face him. "To remind myself that I'm a real person, William. Someone with a mind and skills and something worth offering. Something you've apparently spent 3 years forgetting." "I haven't forgotten anything." "No? Then tell me, when did you last truly see me?" Not as an obligation, not as an inconvenience, but as a person. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. "That's what I thought," she said softly. When they arrived home, Emily started up the stairs. At the top, she paused and turned. William was still standing in the hallway below, looking up at her. "Thank you for tonight," she said. It was illuminating. "Emily." Something in his voice made her stop. "Yes." He hesitated, a long, rare beat of uncertainty, and then shook his head. "Nothing. Good night." "Good night." She slipped into her room, but sleep wouldn't come. For the first time in 3 years, she had glimpsed something unfamiliar in William Anderson. Jealousy, perhaps, or possessiveness. Whatever it was, it had clearly reached somewhere inside him that nothing else ever had. Across the hall, William was pacing. The image wouldn't leave him. Richard looking at Emily, lifting her hand, drawing out her laughter. It had burned into him like a brand pressed against skin. And behind it, something he couldn't reason away, a raw, territorial fury. An instinct to stand between his wife and every man in that room. His wife. When had Emily actually become that in his mind, rather than simply a name written beside his on a legal document? He stopped at the window, staring out at the city. In a single evening, she had dismantled 3 years of deliberately constructed distance, and he had no idea what to do with the wreckage. William was awake before 5 the next morning, the same image replaying without mercy. Richard Thompson, attentive, charming, his eyes alive with interest whenever he looked at Emily. The memory refused to go quiet. He rose and moved to the window. 3 years. 3 years they had lived under the same roof, and he had never once felt this, whatever this was. Something old and instinctive had stirred to life inside him. Something he couldn't name or contain. He went downstairs earlier than usual, just past 6, and found Emily already there. She sat at the kitchen counter with both hands wrapped around a mug, her gaze drifting out the window. She wore a simple robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. The morning light fell softly across her face. William stopped in the doorway. He had looked at her hundreds of times over the past 3 years and seen nothing. Now he couldn't look away. Not presentable, as he had so carelessly said the day before, but genuinely, quietly beautiful. The line of her jaw, the curve of her neck, the stillness that surrounded her like something earned. "You're staring at me," Emily said, without turning around. He cleared his throat, checking whether you'd reconsidered tonight's dinner. She turned then, and the moment their eyes met, he felt something shift in the center of his chest. "I haven't. Why not? What does this man offer that's worth so much to you?" Emily tilted her head, studying him with a calm that made him feel exposed. "Attention, respect, the simple feeling that I matter." The word struck deeper than he expected. He moved to the counter, standing closer to her than he had in years. "You matter. To you." Her eyes shone with quiet challenge. "Because until last night, I might as well have been a ghost in this house." He had nothing to give her, because she was right. He had moved through 3 years of shared space without once truly registering her. And now, standing this close, he couldn't fathom how he had managed to be so blind. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Emily asked, her voice dropping just slightly. "Like what?" "Like you're seeing me for the first time." "Maybe I am," William said. The silence between them thickened, charged with something neither of them had words for yet. Emily felt her pulse quicken. There was an intensity in his eyes she had never encountered before, something stripped of its usual guard. "William," she began, "cancel the dinner." "Why?" She stood, bringing them nearly face to face. "Give me a real reason." He struggled. How could he possibly explain that the thought of Richard making her laugh, making her feel seen, was eating him alive? How could he admit that after 3 years of refusing to see her, he was suddenly incapable of looking away? "Because you're my wife," was all he managed. "On paper," Emily replied, though something had shifted in her voice too. "On paper," William repeated. His eyes said something else entirely. They stood without moving, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could catch the scent of expensive cologne layered beneath something warmer, more human. "You've changed," she said softly. What do you mean? Yesterday, you could barely say my name. Today she paused, searching. Different. He ran a hand through his hair, the composure he usually wore so effortlessly cracking at the edges. I don't know what's happening to me. The rawness of it caught Emily completely off guard. She had never heard him sound uncertain before. Never seen him without that armor of cold authority. What did you feel last night? She asked carefully, when Richard was speaking to me. He held her gaze for a long moment. Anger. An anger I couldn't justify. Every time he looked at you. Jealousy. The word hung suspended between them. William didn't answer, but his eyes did. Why? Emily pressed. Why do you suddenly care? I don't know. The words came out with sudden force, and he stepped back, as though they had surprised him too. I don't know why I can't get you out of my head. I don't know why the thought of you sitting across from that man at dinner makes me want to put my fist through a wall. Emily stared at him, shaken by the rawness in his voice. 3 years of frost, and now this. Do you want the truth, William? He turned back to her, eyes burning. Yes. I spent all night thinking about the fact that you've never once looked at me. Not really. I thought about what it means that a stranger saw in one evening what my own husband has been blind to for 3 years. Emily's heart was hammering. And what did he see? William stepped closer again, his gaze moving slowly across her face as though he were committing it to memory. A woman with intelligence, with beauty, with strength, someone who deserves to be known, not overlooked. Emily felt the sting of tears she refused to shed. 3 years, William. I spent 3 years waiting for even the smallest sign that you saw me as more than a burden. I know. His voice was low, and I despised myself for it. Then why now? Why only now does any of this matter to you? He paused, and then, quietly, because watching another man want you made me understand that I want you too. And that terrifies me more than I know how to say. The words reshaped the air between them. Emily felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her feet. I'm still going to dinner with Richard tonight, she said, though her voice was no longer entirely steady. Why? She lifted her chin. Because you had 3 years, William. 3 years to choose me. You don't get to walk into my morning and expect me to abandon my dignity simply because you finally decided I exist. She moved past him and up the stairs, leaving him alone in the kitchen, more unsettled, more undone than he had ever allowed himself to be in his life. Behind her bedroom door, Emily pressed her back against the wood and closed her eyes. Everything had shifted. In one morning, the entire architecture of their silence had cracked open. The question was what she would build or let fall from here. You can't simply decide overnight that you want to be a real husband and expect me to fall in line as though none of it happened. William rose too, but his voice remained measured. I don't expect you to fall in line. I'm asking for the chance to earn your trust. Earn it. A short, humorless laugh escaped her. I'm not a trophy, William. No, he agreed, closing the distance between them by a step. You're my wife, and I was a fool for not treating you like one from the very start. Emily backed up instinctively and found the counter behind her. You're making my head spin, she admitted, her voice quieter now. 3 years of nothing, and now this. I don't know what to make of any of it. William stepped closer, near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Then make of it this, he said, his voice dropping low. I've finally woken up. What was standing right in front of me? I can see it now. Emily felt the heat of his presence, the scent of his cologne threaded with something warmer beneath it. William, she started. Cancel Richard. She blinked. What? The job he offered you. Turn it down. Why on earth would I do that? His nearness was making it difficult to think straight. Because I want you working with me. Emily pressed both hands gently against his chest and created space between them. Working with you? At Anderson Enterprises. Your background in emerging markets. I have projects across Latin America that need exactly what you know how to do. She stared at him. You're offering me a job? I'm offering a partnership. Professional and personal. This is absurd. It's an opportunity. Emily shook her head and moved away from him. I don't understand what's happening to you. William followed at a careful distance. What's happening is that I finally understood I've been standing beside the most extraordinary woman I've ever known and refusing to look at her. Now I want to make it right. How am I supposed to trust that this isn't temporary? That by next week you won't have retreated back into silence?" William stopped. Emily turned to face him. "Because," he said, those blue eyes burning with quiet resolve, "I can't go back to ignoring you. Last night made that impossible. Watching you across that table, watching another man make you smile, I understood something that I can't unfeel." "What specifically changed last night? What was it exactly?" He paused, then chose honesty over pride. "Jealousy, pure and undiluted. Seeing him look at you, touch your hand, draw out your laughter, it tore something loose in me. And it showed me that you aren't just a name on a marriage certificate. You're mine." The words settled over them like smoke. Emily felt something stir deep in her chest. Equal parts anger, grief, and something far more dangerous. "Yours." Her voice was low and sharp. "Mine," William said, advancing again. "I'm not your property, William Anderson." "No," he said at once. "You're not. But you are my wife, and I want you to be my wife in every meaning of that word." Her pulse quickened. The way he was looking at her was doing something to her she wasn't prepared for, a focused, unguarded intensity that bypassed every wall she'd built. "And if I don't want that," she challenged. A slow, almost dangerous smile moved across his face, and something absurd stirred in her stomach. "Then I'll simply have to change your mind." "Ow!" Rather than answering, William closed the remaining distance. He was close enough now that she could see the faint gold threading through the blue of his eyes. "Starting with this," he murmured, and raised one hand to touch her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd expected. Emily knew she should step away. She knew she should say something firm and final. But his touch was so careful, so unexpectedly tender, and she had spent 3 years starving for the simplest acknowledgement. "William," she whispered, but didn't move. "Tell me to stop," he said, his thumb tracing softly along her cheek. She knew she should. She knew this was fire, and she was standing far too close to it. But the words dissolved before they reached her lips. "You're playing games with me," she finally managed. "I'm not playing anything." His voice was utterly serious. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." They remained like that, suspended in a silence that crackled with everything neither of them had yet said. It was Emily who finally moved, stepping back and drawing a breath to steady herself. "I need time to think." "How much time?" "I don't know. Days. Weeks, maybe." 3 years isn't something you erase in a morning, William. He nodded, and his expression held no defeat, only patience. "All right, but while you're thinking, I'll be showing you, every day, the kind of husband I'm capable of being." "William, I'm not giving up, Emily. Not this time." With that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone, her heart hammering, her thoughts completely unraveled. Later that same day, Emily found white roses on her dresser. The card beside them read simply, "To new beginnings." At noon, William came home, something he had never once done before, carrying Thai food from a restaurant Emily had mentioned offhandedly years ago. She had no idea how he'd remembered. That evening, instead of disappearing behind his office door, he invited her to watch a film in the living room. She declined, but she noticed he left the door open and the volume low, as though quietly leaving the invitation standing. For 3 days, the pattern held. William restructured his entire life around her presence. Breakfast shared at the same table. Lunches at home. Dinners where he actually asked about her day and listened to the answer. Emily moved through it all feeling off balance, guarded, and undeniably curious. It was like discovering a completely different man living inside the one she had married. "He's really trying," she whispered to herself on the 3rd night, watching William from across the room as he sat reading instead of hunched over his laptop. The question was whether she was willing to meet him halfway, and beneath that, whether she was willing to put her heart in his hands again. A week had gone by since William had begun his quiet campaign. Emily was still holding the line, but something in her had begun to shift. She found herself anticipating breakfast, wondering over dinner what they would talk about, and catching her eyes drifting to him when he wasn't looking. That Friday morning, she was in the garden with a book when Mrs. Thompson appeared with the cordless phone. "Mrs. Anderson," There's a Mr. Richard Thompson calling. He says it concerns business. A ripple of unease moved through her. She hadn't spoken to Richard since the dinner that had set everything in motion. Hello, Richard. Emily, it's wonderful to hear your voice. How are you? I'm well, thank you. And you? Very well. I'm calling because I need a decision on our offer. I have meetings in New York next week, and I'd very much like to have you on my team. Emily hesitated. William had raised the possibility of her working at Anderson Enterprises more than once over the past few days, but she hadn't committed to anything. Richard, I'm still weighing my options. Of course. Would you be open to meeting today, to talk it through? Lunch, perhaps? I could come to you. Emily glanced toward the house. William was in a meeting and wasn't expected back until evening. All right. What time? Noon. Perfect. See you soon, Emily. She hung up the phone, unaware that William had come home early and caught fragments of the conversation through his open office window. He climbed the stairs with deliberate steps, a familiar heat rising in his chest. Richard Thompson again. That man had become a persistent thorn. All week William had rearranged his world to prove himself to Emily. Canceled meetings, rescheduled calls, come home in the middle of the day. He had done everything he could think of, and now, apparently, it hadn't been enough. At 11:30, he stood at the window and watched Emily get ready. She'd chosen a yellow dress that caught the sunlight against her skin, her hair falling in loose, soft waves. She looked beautiful, and it made his irritation sharper. When Richard's car appeared in the drive, William made a decision he knew was impulsive. He grabbed his keys and followed them. Richard had chosen an upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills, elegant, but less intimate than the first time, a detail Emily quietly appreciated. So, Richard said after they'd ordered, "Tell me what's going on. You sounded different on the phone." Emily exhaled slowly. Things at home are complicated. With William, he's changing, or doing a very convincing impression of it. Richard leaned forward. What do you mean? He's decided he wants to be a real husband. He's rearranged his entire routine, trying to prove it. And that's a problem? Emily pushed her food around her plate. I don't know. 1 week doesn't undo 3 years. But are you considering giving him a chance? I'm torn, she admitted. Part of me wants to believe he means it, but the part that spent 3 years being invisible is afraid this is temporary. Richard reached across the table and rested his hand gently over hers. Emily, may I be honest with you? Please. You deserve more than someone's attention when it's finally convenient for them. You deserve someone who sees your value from the very beginning. Emily looked down at their joined hands, genuinely moved. Thank you. That means more than you know, which is exactly why my offer still stands. Work with me. Build something independent. Your future shouldn't hinge on whether he's in a good mood. At that precise moment, Emily felt the temperature in the room change. A familiar silhouette moved through the restaurant entrance. Her blood went cold. William crossed the floor directly to their table, his expression a controlled mask of cold composure. What a coincidence, he said, his voice dangerously even. Richard released Emily's hand and rose politely. William, what a surprise. I'm sure it is, William replied, his eyes dropping briefly to the table where their hands had been. William, Emily kept her voice steady. What are you doing here? Having lunch. Much like the two of you, it seems. The tension was palpable enough that nearby tables had begun to take notice. Why don't you join us? Richard offered, attempting to diffuse things. How gracious, William said, pulling out a chair and sitting before anyone could respond. Emily stared at him. We were having a private conversation. About business, I assume, William said, eyes on her face. Yes, Richard confirmed. I'm making the case for Emily to accept my offer. How interesting. His tone communicated that he found it anything but. And what does this offer involve? Emily felt her patience ignite. The chance to use the education and skills that you never once bothered to ask about. William looked at her, something sharp edging into his expression. I did offer you a position at Anderson Enterprises. A favor. Richard offered because he recognizes my professional worth. I'm sure he recognizes quite a few things about you, William said, and the insinuation in his voice was unmistakable. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps I should leave you too. No, Emily said firmly. You don't need to go anywhere. William stood abruptly. Actually, he does. Richard looked at him calmly. Excuse me. You need to stop pursuing my wife. Emily shot to her feet, her face flushing. Pursuing? He's extending a professional opportunity. He's extending more than that, and every person at this table knows it. Richard rose with quiet dignity. William, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Have there? William's posture shifted, something controlled and dangerous beneath the surface. Do you think I haven't noticed how you look at her? How you manufacture reasons to touch her? William, Emily said through her teeth. It's true, he pressed, his voice climbing. He's interested in you, and you've been enjoying every moment of it. The words hit her like a flat, open hand. How dare you? I dare because I'm your husband. On paper, she said, and her voice cracked open with it. Only ever on paper. The restaurant had gone still around them. Richard placed several bills quietly on the table. I'll leave you both to it, he said, with composed dignity. Emily, call me when you've made your decision. He left without looking back. Emily and William stood facing each other in the ringing silence he'd left behind. Congratulations, she said, her voice trembling with fury. You've just humiliated me in front of everyone in this room. You humiliated yourself by letting him touch you like that. She stepped forward, close enough that her voice could stay low and still cut. Who exactly do you think you are? You ignored me for 3 years. 3 years, William. And now you believe you have some kind of claim over who I speak to. I am your husband. Then you should have started acting like it years ago. Her voice broke through its restraint. You don't get to vanish for 3 years and then reappear with a possessive streak and call it love. William reached for her arm, not roughly but firmly. Let's go. Don't touch me. Emily, people are watching. Let them. But his hand was already at her back, guiding her steadily toward the exit, and something in the pressure of it, not controlling, just present, made her let him. In the parking lot, away from the eyes inside, she pulled free. How dare you follow me, she said, her voice raw. How dare you walk in there and make a spectacle of me like that? I couldn't stop myself. Couldn't stop yourself from what? From following me? From acting like I belong to you? From watching another man look at you like that? His voice broke slightly on the last word. Like he wants you. Emily went quiet, something shifting in the air between them. And what if he does? She asked, her voice lower now, but still sharp. William stepped toward her, eyes burning with something unguarded and entirely raw. So what? Emily, you're my wife. Then be my husband. That is what I'm trying to do. By following me? By making a scene in public? By acting as though I'm something you own? He shoved a hand through his hair, visibly unraveling. I don't know how to do this. I was never taught. I don't know how to be a real husband. The honesty in it, unpolished, almost desperate, stopped her cold. Then learn, she said, and her voice had gone quiet. But not like this. William looked at her, and for just a second, Emily forgot to breathe. Emily, he said, his voice rough at the edges, you have no idea what you're doing to me. What do you mean? He stepped closer, near enough that the warmth of him reached her. I mean, you're unraveling me completely. I have no idea how to be rational around you anymore. Her heart had picked up its pace without permission. There was something in the way he looked at her, stripped of every layer of authority and control, that reached something she'd kept carefully guarded. You have a power over me, he admitted, barely above a whisper. A power I can't explain and can't contain. Emily looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time didn't see the untouchable CO behind the glass. She saw a man who was disoriented and honest about it, and falling. Power to make me jealous, he continued. Power to make me lose control. Power to make me want things I didn't even know I was capable of wanting. A strange warmth moved through her. After 3 years of feeling as though she occupied no space at all, the knowledge that she could shake him like this was quietly, dangerously intoxicating. And what is it you want? She asked softly. He held her gaze for a long, unguarded moment. You, Emily. I want you. The words landed in the open air of that parking lot and stayed there. Emily felt the world narrow to a single, suspended breath. 3 years of marriage. And it was the first time those words had come from him carrying real weight, real ache, real meaning. William, don't answer now, he said quietly. Just carry it with you. They drove home in separate cars, the silence between them no longer empty but full, dense with everything that had passed. Emily spent the afternoon in her room, turning his words over and over. I want you. It hadn't sounded like desire alone. It had sounded like something deeper, something that had frightened him even as he said it. The next morning, she came downstairs expecting to find him. The kitchen was empty. Mrs. Thompson told her he'd left early for a full-day meeting. Emily stood in the quiet kitchen and felt something she hadn't expected, a clean, unmistakable wave of disappointment. She had grown accustomed to seeing him there, to his steadiness across the breakfast table. Around 3, her phone rang. Richard, Emily, I hope this isn't a bad time. I wanted to reach out after yesterday. Richard, please don't apologize. William's behavior was his to own, not yours. May I say something candidly? Of course. That man is in love with you. Thoroughly and without reservation. I recognize it clearly. Emily's heart stumbled. You think so? I'm quite certain of it. The only question is how you feel. She was quiet for a moment. Confused. Frightened. But I think, she paused. I think I'm in love with him too. Richard made a small sound of recognition. Then why are you here talking to me? Because 3 years is a long time to be kept at a distance. And I don't entirely trust what I'm feeling. People change, Emily. Sometimes it takes the near loss of something irreplaceable to make a person understand what they've been holding carelessly. Are you actually encouraging me to go back to my husband? A warm laugh. I'm being honest with you. That man is gone for you, completely. And you for him. I'm simply the inconvenient event that made him realize it. A catalyst, you mean? Precisely. I gave him a reason to look at what he already had. Without something to shake him loose, he might never have come to it on his own. Emily regarded Richard with a quiet, genuine respect. You're remarkably clear-eyed about all of this, and you are very deeply loved. What you do with that is entirely up to you. What Emily didn't know, as she ended the call, was that William had also come to Giovanni's that evening, unable to sit still in the house with his imagination running loose. He had taken a seat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and watched from a careful distance. What he saw was not what he had feared. No seduction, no performance. Just two people talking quietly and seriously, like friends who respected each other. Excuse me, a voice said. William turned. Richard Thompson, standing at the bar with his hands in his pockets and a calm expression. Mind if I sit? William gestured to the stool beside him. Emily's in the restroom. Seemed like a reasonable moment. To say what? That you are an extraordinarily fortunate man. William said nothing, waiting. Your wife is remarkable. Intelligent, loyal, strong, and completely in love with you. She spent this entire evening talking about you, about how much you've changed, about how terrified she is of believing in it. Something shifted in William's chest, deep and slow. She said that, not in those exact words, but that's precisely what I heard. Richard studied him for a moment. Can I offer you something? Go ahead. Stop holding part of yourself back. She needs to know, not suspect, not hope, but know that you won't disappear on her again. William absorbed that in silence, then glanced at him. And the job offer? Richard smiled and set down his glass. Withdrawn. She belongs at Anderson Enterprises. A beat. And with you. When Emily returned from the restroom and found the two men sitting together at the bar in easy conversation, she stopped where she stood. What exactly is happening here? William rose and crossed to her. Richard and I came to an understanding. What kind of understanding? That I'm a fortunate fool, William said, his eyes holding hers, who has no intention of squandering a second chance. Emily looked between them. I'll leave you both to it, Richard said, lifting his coat from the back of the stool. Emily, it's been a genuine pleasure. William, take care of her. When he was gone, Emily turned to William. Why did you come? Because I couldn't sit in that house imagining what might be happening. But you said you trusted me. I do trust you, but trust doesn't make it painless. He looked at her steadily. Let's go home, Emily. We need to talk, properly this time. She nodded. In the car, The silence carried a different quality than any silence they had shared before. Not tension born of resentment. Anticipation. "Emily," William said as the city moved past them, "when we get home, I'm going to tell you everything. What I feel. What I want. What I want for us." She turned toward him. "And what if I told you I want the same thing?" He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "Then we're in for a very long night." Inside the house, they stood in the entry hall, facing each other. The air held a charged, expectant stillness. 3 years of silence had reached their natural end. "Emily," William said, his voice low and careful, "before anything else, there's something I need to say." "What is it?" "I love you." The words fell between them like something long held and finally released. Emily felt tears form before she could stop them. "William, let me finish." He stepped toward her. "I love you in a way I never thought I was made for. I fell in love with your strength, with the dignity you held on to when I gave you every reason to lose it, with the intelligence I was too arrogant and too blind to recognize." A tear traced down her cheek. 3 years, she whispered. 3 years I waited, and I'm a fool for every one of them." He reached up, cradling her face in his hands with the greatest care. "Emily, I have no right to ask this, but could you love me?" She looked at him through the blur of tears and saw, for the very first time, that he was completely unguarded. No automat, no control, just a man asking. "I already do," she said. "I think I always have, even when you made it impossible, even when it hurt so much I wanted to stop." William closed his eyes as though her words had struck something he'd been bracing against for a long time. "Emily." Her name and his voice sounded different now, like something claimed rather than merely known. She stepped forward and placed her hands gently against his face. "Kiss me," she whispered. He didn't need another word. He kissed her softly at first, and then, as she kissed him back with everything he had been holding at a careful distance for 3 years. It was her first real kiss. Not the formal brushing of lips at a ceremony. Not something performed for appearances. A kiss with love behind it, and longing, and a fragile, real hope of a future neither of them had been certain they would reach. When they parted, both of them were breathing differently. "I want to be your husband," William said, his lips still close to hers. Truly, in every sense, Emily felt her heart move into a different register entirely. "I want that too." He took her hand and led her upstairs to the master bedroom, the room she had never entered in 3 years of living under the same roof. She stepped inside and felt the nervous weight of the moment settle over her. "Emily," he had noticed immediately. "If you're not ready." "It's not that," she said quickly. She turned to face him, drew a slow breath, and found the courage. "William, there's something you need to know. You never." He frowned gently, puzzled. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm a virgin," she said, quiet and direct. The stillness that followed was complete. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "What did you?" "I'm a virgin," she repeated, softer, but just as clear. William stared at her. Whatever he had expected, it hadn't been this. "Emily, we've been married for 3 years. On paper," she reminded him. "You never came near me. You barely spoke to me. How would it have happened?" He turned away briefly, pressing a hand to his face and then back. "My God," his voice had gone rough. "You're 25 years old. I'm aware of that." "How, why?" He exhaled slowly, trying to gather himself. "Before the marriage?" Emily sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling the full exposure of the moment. "I was focused on school, then on work. And after the wedding," she looked at him steadily. "You made it abundantly clear that you had no interest in me whatsoever." William crossed to her and lowered himself onto one knee in front of her, taking both of her hands in his. "Emily," his voice broke slightly. "I'm so sorry. I'm so profoundly sorry. I never knew. I never even thought to. How could you have? You never asked." He closed his eyes, sitting with the full weight of that. When he opened them, they were dark with something that looked like grief. "Do you hate me for it?" "No," she said simply. "I don't hate you. But I need you to understand what tonight means. If this happens, it will be my first time. With anyone." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Are you sure, Emily? We can wait. There's no rush." I'll wait however long you need. She reached up and touched his face. I've waited 3 years to truly be your wife, she said. I don't want to wait anymore. With a tenderness that bore no resemblance to the man she had married in name only, William kissed her again, slowly, reverently, with a care that felt like a promise made without words. He was patient in a way she hadn't known he was capable of, and gentle in a way that answered every fear she hadn't quite voiced. What he gave her that night was not just intimacy, but the full, unhurried attention of a man who understood, finally and completely, the weight of what he held. Emily woke to the smell of fresh coffee and something warm and sweet drifting through the air. She opened her eyes slowly. Morning light pressed through the curtains of William's bedroom, their bedroom now. Good morning, my wife. She turned. William was coming through the doorway carrying a tray, croissants, sliced fruit, coffee, orange juice, and a single pale rose in a small glass vase. William, she said, sitting up, you didn't have to do all this. Yes, I did. He settled the tray between them and sat beside her. I wanted to do something worthy of the most important person in my life. Emily looked at the tray, then at him, and felt something warm and unguarded move through her. This was the same man who had once gone months without saying her name. How are you feeling? He asked, his hand finding her face. Different, she said honestly. Whole. He smiled and kissed her gently. No regrets. Not a single one. A pause. You? Only that I wasted so much time getting here. They ate breakfast in bed, talking with an ease that surprised them both. Two people finally learning the shape of each other, but with the particular intimacy of people who had already shared the same silence for 3 years. It felt like beginning and continuation at once. In the days that followed, Emily watched William change in ways that went beyond routine. He canceled meetings to be with her. He took her to corners of Los Angeles she had never seen. And more than anything, he talked about his work, his doubts, the things he was learning to want. He asked her questions and listened to the answers. One evening they sat together on the porch as the sky went soft with dusk. Emily finally asked what had lived quietly in the back of her mind for weeks. William, why were you the way you were? Before any of this, people always described you as cold. Even before we married. He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the yard. My family, he said at last. Growing up in Anderson, everything was performance. Business, money, status. My father ran the household like a corporation. My mother cared more about what things looked like than about the people inside them. Emily watched his profile. Nobody taught you what love actually was. Nobody taught me it existed. Everything was a transaction, a calculation. When a marriage was arranged, I treated it accordingly. He paused. I treated you accordingly. And now, William took her hand and laced his fingers through hers. Now I understand that I was completely wrong. I've learned that love isn't something that weakens you. It's the most substantial thing there is. Who taught you that? He looked at her directly. You did. Watching you hold your dignity when I gave you no reason to. Watching you choose grace when you had every right to bitterness. Emily felt tears gather at the edges. William, I know the past 3 years don't dissolve just because things have changed, he said. I know part of you is still waiting for this to fade. Still afraid I'll slide back into what I was. She nodded slowly. I am. I can't pretend I'm not. He turned fully toward her, holding her face in both hands. Emily Anderson, look at me. She did. I swear to you, on everything I'm capable of meaning, that I will never again make you feel invisible. You change me at the level where change actually counts. There is no version of going back. How can I be certain? Because you're not a conquest to me. You're my correction. My second chance to become the man I should have been standing beside you from the very first day. William proved those words in the days that came after, not with declarations, but with presence. He was attentive without being suffocating, protective without needing to possess. When Emily decided to take on an independent consulting project, he didn't hesitate. You're sure? She asked. I'll be working with some of your competitors. I'm completely sure, he said. I want you fulfilled. What's good for you is good for us. Their closeness deepened alongside everything else. William remained unhurried and affectionate. Every shared moment an expression of the love they were, slowly and carefully, learning to build. One night, as they lay together in the quiet that followed an evening of warmth and nearness, Emily said the words she had been turning over for some time. "I trust you." William rolled to face her. "Really? Completely. With my heart. With whatever comes next." He kissed her slowly, with the full weight of the promise behind it. "I will never give you reason to regret that." And Emily knew he meant it. Not because he had said the right things, but because she had watched him choose differently day after day when no one was testing him. The man she had married in a cold, contractual silence was genuinely gone. What remained was someone who loved her with an honesty she had stopped believing she would ever receive. For the first time since she had walked down that aisle 3 years ago, Emily Anderson felt like a wife. Felt like herself. Felt whole. 2 months had passed since Emily and William had truly, finally, begun their marriage. They had built a life together that surpassed anything either of them had once dared to imagine. Emily had poured herself into her consulting work, and William stood behind every endeavor she pursued with the same steady conviction he brought to everything he truly cared about. Their love did not plateau. It continued to deepen, slowly and surely, the way roots spread underground without any visible sign of the work being done. Then a Tuesday morning arrived and dismantled everything. Emily was straightening the papers in William's office, sorting, organizing, returning things to their proper places, when a thick folder slid out from the narrow space behind the desk and landed at her feet. She picked it up without thinking, assuming it was something that had been overlooked, and opened it to check the contents. The blood drained from her face before she fully understood what she was reading. Contracts. Exhaustively detailed, formally executed merger contracts between Peterson Accounting, her parents' firm, the small company her father had spent his career building, and Anderson Enterprises. Every page was dated 3 years earlier, in the weeks bracketing their wedding. Emily's legs gave way before she told them to, and she sank into the chair. Her hands shook as she turned each page. The terms were unambiguous. Their marriage would serve as the mechanism securing the full absorption of Peterson Accounting into Anderson Enterprises. The Peterson family would retain a 20% stake in the consolidated entity and receive a substantial cash payment. William would assume complete operational control. "This can't be," she whispered, barely a sound, more the shape of words than the words themselves. She kept reading because part of her needed to be wrong. She wasn't wrong. Buried in the later sections were provisions about children, about mandatory public appearances, about a minimum marriage duration of 5 years, a condition designed to guarantee the merger stability. She was not a wife. She was a term and contract. The door opened. William stepped in, still carrying the energy of a productive morning, a half-smile already forming. "Emily, you won't believe how much ground we covered in that meeting." He stopped. Looked at her. "Emily, what's wrong?" She rose from the chair slowly, the contracts held between both hands like something she needed witnesses to confirm was real. "Would you explain these to me?" William's eyes moved to the papers, and Emily watched the color evacuate his face in a single, visible rush. "Emily, let me explain." "Explain what exactly?" Her voice was unervingly steady. "That our marriage was a business instrument? That I am a line item in a corporate acquisition? It isn't like that. It isn't." She produced a short, hollow laugh. "Clause 5, William. The marriage between William Anderson and Emily Peterson shall secure the full acquisition of Peterson Accounting by Anderson Enterprises. It is precisely like that. It is exactly, literally, word for word like that." He reached toward her. She stepped back. "Emily, please let me give you the context." "What context?" "You knew. You knew this from the very beginning." "I knew about the merger, yes, but..." "But what?" She searched his face. "You assumed I would never be clever enough to find out? That you could keep using me indefinitely, and I'd simply never understand what I was to your company? You're misreading this." Emily set the contracts on the desk between them with deliberate, controlled precision. "Am I? Then correct me. Tell me which part one have wrong. The part where our marriage financed the takeover of my family's business, or the part where your lawyers wrote provisions about when we're expected to produce children. William dragged a hand through his hair, his composure visibly coming apart at the edges. Emily, yes, there was a business arrangement, but it predates everything that matters. It was before I truly knew you, before I fell in love with you. Before you fell in love, she repeated, as if testing the phrase for structural integrity. It collapsed under the weight. William, you knew about this yesterday when you said you loved me. You knew it the week before when we were together. You have known it through every month of what I believed was a real marriage, a marriage I fought to believe in. I wasn't performing. What I feel for you is genuine. How am I supposed to know that? How do I separate what is real from what keeps your contract intact? She began to move, unable to stay still. My parents knew too. That's why they pushed so hard for this marriage. It wasn't only about the debts. They were selling the company. They were selling it, and selling me along with it. William said nothing. His silence was its own answer. My God, the words left her barely above a breath. I was sold twice. Once to cover what they owed, and once to make certain you got everything you were after. Emily, please, don't come near me. She held up one hand. Don't touch me and don't tell me you love me, because I have no idea what any of it means anymore. What we have is not a fabrication. My feelings for you are real. Ow! She turned to face him fully, tears now moving freely down her face. How do I know what's real? How do I know which parts of you were genuine and which parts were simply necessary for the contract to hold? Because you know my heart, William said, crossing toward her. You know the man I've become with you. Doi, or have you just become very, very good at this? He stopped as though she'd struck him. Emily, you know that isn't true. Doi. Her voice cracked. 2 hours ago, I was certain my husband loved me for who I am. Now I find out he loved me because I made him $15 million richer. She looked at him steadily. If I matter more to you than the business, give it back. Undo the merger. Return my family's company to them. He hesitated. 1 second. 2. That hesitation told her everything she needed to know. There it is, she said, her voice fracturing. When the choice is between me and the money, you choose the money. Exactly the way you chose the money 3 years ago. Emily, it isn't that straightforward. It is precisely that straightforward. Her voice climbed without her meaning it to. You either love me for who I am, or you love me for what I represent on your company's balance sheet. You cannot make both things true simultaneously. She walked to the bedroom. He followed. What are you doing? Leaving. She pulled her suitcase from the wardrobe and opened it on the bed. I'm going to stay at a hotel until I can think clearly. Emily, don't. Please. We can find our way through this together. She turned from the suitcase to look at him. Find our way through what exactly? How do you repair the fact that this marriage, the one I finally started to believe in, was constructed on a foundation I was never permitted to see? What we have now is not built on that foundation. She paused, a folded shirt in her hands, and looked at him. How do I know that? How do I know whether you have genuinely changed, or whether you have simply become more practiced at the illusion? Silence. He had no answer. That's what I thought. She zipped the suitcase. Emily, please stay. We can talk. I promise you, we can find a way. She looked at him for what felt like the last time, her heart pressing painfully against the inside of her chest. William, I need time away from this house and away from you to understand what is real and what was a performance. I cannot do that here. And if I told you I won't let you go, Emily raised her chin. Then you would be proving that nothing between us has changed, that you still believe you have the right to decide what I do. William stepped back. He understood. Trying to hold her here would confirm everything she feared. How long? I don't know. Perhaps forever. She lifted the suitcase and walked toward the door. Emily. His voice broke entirely on her name. I love you. Whatever else is uncertain, that is real. She stopped in the doorway. She did not turn around. I hope you mean that, William. Because if you don't, then we have truly lost everything. Emily spent 7 days in a modest hotel in downtown Los Angeles. 7 days of silence, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the occasional muffled traffic from the street below. She didn't answer William's calls. She didn't reply to a single message. She had quietly asked the front desk to turn away any inquiries about her. She needed to think. She needed the particular clarity that only distance can deliver. Because the marriage that had finally, after so much pain and patience, become real and warm and hers had been resting on a framework of deliberate omissions since the very beginning. How did you reconstruct trust after that? How did you know where the architecture of deceit ended and the truth began? William, meanwhile, was surviving inside his own private wreckage. The mansion without Emily was a different structure entirely. Same rooms, same furniture, same views from the same windows, and yet fundamentally hollow. He ate poorly. He barely slept. Work, which had once been the whole of his identity, now felt like a language he no longer had any use for. But Emily had issued a challenge. Not in so many words, but clearly, unmistakably. If he truly loved her more than the company, he had one way to demonstrate it. One way that could not be explained away or reframed or presented as anything other than what it was. On Monday morning, William walked into the Anderson Enterprises boardroom, where his father, Robert, sat waiting with two company lawyers arranged on either side of him. William, this was marked urgent. What's this about? William placed a folder on the table in front of them. I want to dissolve the Peterson accounting merger. The room went absolutely silent. Robert looked at him the way a man looks at someone who has just said something in a language he doesn't recognize. I beg your pardon? I want the company returned to the Peterson family. In full. Every asset, every share, everything. You have completely lost your mind. Robert's voice was flat with disbelief. That merger is worth $15 million. I'm aware of exactly what it's worth. Robert pushed back from the table and stood. William, you cannot dissolve a 3-year acquisition because of a domestic dispute. This would be a catastrophe for the company. This is not a domestic dispute, and this is not a catastrophe. It is a correction. William met his father's gaze. It's the right thing to do. The right thing. Robert's voice sharpened. You're going to incinerate $15 million and walk away from everything we built. I'm not walking away from anything. I'm choosing something more important. William turned to the lawyers. What would dissolution require? One of them cleared his throat with visible discomfort. Technically, Mr. Anderson, it is achievable. However, the legal costs and required settlements would be significant. I don't care what it costs, William said. Draft the documents. Robert seized his arm. William, stop. Think about what you're doing. The company's reputation, $15 million. William removed his father's hand, quietly and without drama. You spent my entire childhood teaching me that money was the only thing worth protecting. That business came before people, before relationships, before everything else. He paused. You were wrong. He looked at his father directly. Emily is worth more than $15 million. She is worth more than this entire company. She is worth more than everything I have accumulated or will ever accumulate in my life. Robert shook his head slowly. You're being irrational. You're letting emotion override judgment. I'm being human. That's something you never found time to teach me. William turned back to the lawyers. I want all documentation prepared by the end of the week. Peterson Accounting is returned to David and Sarah Peterson without conditions. Any funds they received as part of the original agreement, they keep. Consider it fair compensation for the 3 years. He picked up his jacket. The decision is final. He left without waiting for a response. There was one more thing he needed to do before he went after Emily. David and Sarah Peterson were finishing their morning coffee when the doorbell rang. Sarah opened the front door and stood very still for a moment when she saw who was standing on the step. William. She recovered. Come in, please. William found David in the sitting room and stood before them both without any preamble or softening. I'm here to tell you that I'm returning Peterson Accounting to you. I'm canceling the merger and transferring everything back to your family. All of it. David and Sarah exchanged a long, careful look. William, David said slowly. What do you mean exactly? I mean precisely what I said. The acquisition is being unwound. Your company comes home. But why now? Sarah asked. Because Emily found the contracts. She knows the full terms of the arrangement, including how the marriage itself was written into the agreement. He let that settle before continuing. She's been staying in a hotel for a week. She won't answer my calls. And she's right to be exactly as angry as she is, with me and with both of you. David exhaled slowly, heavily, like a man releasing something he'd been holding for a long time. We always feared she would find out one day. She should have been told from the beginning, Williams said, not cruelly, but with the simple directness of a man who had stopped pretending complexity was an excuse. By all of us. We know, Sarah said, her voice fraying. But we were desperate. The debt, the threat of charges against David. We made a terrible decision, and we never stopped paying for it. I understand what you were facing. But Emily was never given the chance to understand it herself. She was never given the choice. He straightened. That's why the company goes back. She needs to know, not to be told, but to actually know that she matters more than any of this. William, David said after a pause, are you absolutely certain? The financial loss alone. Without Emily, the financial loss is irrelevant. Without her, none of it means anything at all. He stood. My lawyers will be in touch this week. I want everything finalized quickly. After he left, David and Sarah sat together in the quiet that filled the room behind him. He loves her, Sarah said softly. He really does. David was quiet for a long moment. The question is whether it's enough to repair what all of us broke. Emily was sitting on the hotel bed with a book open in her lap, the same page she'd been staring at for 20 minutes, when a nausea surged without any warning. She barely made it to the bathroom. Afterward, she sat on the cool tile floor with her back against the tub, waiting for the room to stop tilting, trying to work out what her body was attempting to tell her. She had been off for days. Not ill, exactly, but wrong in a way she couldn't pin down. Tired beyond what sleep could address. Unsettled at odd hours. Subject to waves of emotion that arrived fully formed and left her undone. A thought moved through her mind quietly, almost gently, and then she understood why it had come softly. Because it was the kind of thought that changed everything, and her mind had known to approach it with care. It can't be. She opened the calendar on her phone. Her period was late. Not a little late. Significantly, undeniably late. Emily dressed with hands that weren't entirely steady and walked to the nearest pharmacy. She stood in the relevant aisle for a moment, then selected 3 different tests, paid without meeting the cashier's eyes, and carried them back to the room. She lined them up on a bathroom counter and waited. The minutes that followed were the longest she had ever lived through. Positive, positive, positive. Emily walked to the bed, sat down slowly, and stared at the 3 tests arranged on the nightstand. After a long moment, she began to cry, and she couldn't have said, with any precision, what proportion of the tears belonged to joy and what proportion belonged to terror. She was carrying William's child, the child of the man she loved and no longer fully trusted, the child of a man whose love for her she could not yet independently verify. How did you bring a child into the center of all of this uncertainty? How did you make decisions about your future when you weren't yet certain what your present actually was? She picked up her phone and found William's name and held the call button under her thumb for a long moment. Then she put the phone down, picked it up again. She had no words for a call. Instead, she typed, "Asterisk, I need to speak with you. It's important. Asterisk." His reply arrived before she had set the phone down. Where? Emily looked around the hotel room, blank and impersonal and belonging to no one, and thought of the bedroom she and William had made their own. The room where everything between them had finally, quietly, become real. Asterisk at home. Our room. 1 hour. Asterisk. She needed ground that meant something, because this conversation would draw a line through time, and everything after would be different. Emily arrived at the Anderson mansion with her heart performing something irregular in her chest. Her hands shook slightly as she let herself in with the key she had held onto without entirely understanding why. The house was still, that particular quality of stillness that feels inhabited rather than empty, as though the space is simply waiting. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the wall, and went to the bedroom they had shared these past months, the room where they had learned what it meant to truly belong to each other. She sat on the edge of the bed, her purse in her lap, 3 pregnancy tests tucked inside it, and tried to find the beginning of the sentence she would need. She heard the Porsche in the driveway. Footsteps on the stairs a few minutes later. The door opened. William stood in the frame, looking like a man who had barely slept in a week, which, she understood, was probably accurate. But when his eyes found her, something in his face shifted so completely and immediately that it silenced the rehearsed version of what she'd planned to say. "Emily," he said quietly, "you came back." She opened her mouth, and instead of words, she began to cry. Everything arrived simultaneously. The betrayal, the loneliness of the past 7 days, the fear, the impossible tenderness of the secret she was carrying. And there was no containing any of it. "Emily." William crossed the room and dropped to one knee beside the bed. "Tell me what's happening. Please." She couldn't speak. Her whole body was shaking with it. After a moment's hesitation, William wrapped his arms around her and drew her against his chest, one hand moving steadily through her hair. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I'm here, whatever it is." "No, William." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "It isn't all right. Nothing about any of this is all right. Tell me what you need." "Anything." Emily steadied her breathing and wiped her face. "Before I tell you what I have to tell you, I need one honest answer from you first." "Anything." "What did you do about the merger? About my parents' company?" He held her gaze without flinching. "I dissolved it. Peterson Accounting goes back to your parents by the end of the week. The money they received, they're keeping all of it." Emily stared at him. "You actually did that?" $15 million, Emily. I walked away from all of it." He held her eyes. "Because you are worth more than that number. Because I needed you to understand, not to hear me say it, but to actually know it, that nothing I feel for you has ever had anything to do with what you were worth to the company." The tears came again, different this time. Quieter. Something releasing rather than breaking. "William, I know I should have told you everything about that agreement long before you had to find it behind a desk. I know that. I'll carry the weight of that for a long time. But what I feel for you, that has never appeared in any contract. That belongs only to us." Emily looked at him for a long moment, searching his face the way she had learned to read him over these months, past the surface, past the controlled exterior, to the place where he was simply a person. "I believe you," she whispered. "You do?" "You do." "And now," she drew a slow breath, "now I have to tell you something that will change the shape of everything between us." William went completely still. Emily reached in her purse. She set 3 pregnancy tests on the bed between them, side by side, and watched his face. "I'm pregnant, William." He didn't move. He looked at the tests. He looked at her. He looked at the tests again. When his eyes came back to hers, they were full, over full, barely contained. "Pregnant," he repeated, as though the word needed to be spoken aloud before it could become real. "I found out today." What happened next was not what she had braced for. William pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a depth and honesty that silenced everything in the room. When they finally drew apart, his face was wet. "Emily." His voice had lost all of its usual command. "I love you. I love you so much. And I already love this baby." Something she had been holding tightly for a week, maybe longer, let go. "Even now," she managed. "Even after everything that's happened. Especially now." He placed one hand gently, carefully, against her stomach. "This child will come into real love. Not a transaction. Not a clause someone buried in a legal document. Something we chose, something we built, for each other." He looked at her. "This is our beginning. Our actual one." Emily leaned into him and finally allowed herself to feel the joy she had been afraid to reach for. "Just the 3 of us now," William murmured into her hair. "A real family," she said softly. "A real family," he confirmed, and held her closer. 6 months later, Emily stood in the garden of the Anderson estate in a white dress she had chosen herself, down to the last detail, the cut, the fabric, the way the soft pleating accommodated the full, beautiful curve of her 6-month pregnancy. She had selected the flowers. She had chosen the music. Every element of this day was a reflection of who she was and what she wanted, because this time, the choice was entirely hers. The ceremony was small and deliberate. Close family, true friends, No one in attendance who hadn't earned their place in the life she and William were choosing together. White roses wound through the garden archways. The evening light fell gently over the handful of faces gathered on the lawn. William was already at the altar when she appeared at the end of the path. He looked as composed as he always did in a tuxedo, except for the tears that had already found their way to his eyes before she had taken 3 steps toward him. Today, the officiant said, William and Emily renew the promises they once made to each other, not as parties to an arrangement, not from obligation or design, but from a love they chose freely and worked hard to reach. Emily, William said, taking both her hands in his. 3 years ago, I stood beside you and called it a marriage. It wasn't. Today I stand beside you, and I mean every word I'm about to say. You taught me what love actually is. You showed me how to be a human being rather than a function. And I will spend everything I have, for as long as I have it, making sure you never doubt that you are always worth more than everything else combined. Emily smiled through the tears already moving down her face. William, you proved to me that real love is patient enough to survive waiting and strong enough to survive the truth. You showed me that people can genuinely change and that second chances can become the best thing that ever happened to you. I promise to love you and our child with everything I have, for every day I'm given. When they kissed, the small garden filled with the sound of people who loved them. Emily heard almost none of it. She heard her own heartbeat, and beneath it, steady, certain, matching his. 1 year later, Emily stood at the window of the office they shared in downtown Los Angeles, watching the morning move across the city below. Behind her, the lettering on the glass door caught the light. The name of the company they had built from their own savings, their own labor, their own combined understanding of how business and people actually work. In 12 months, they had grown to 15 employees and secured contracts spanning 3 countries. Emily led the emerging markets practice. William managed corporate strategy. Together, they made decisions the way they had learned to make all decisions, with full honesty, with equal weight given to each voice, with the shared understanding that the partnership itself was the point. How's our little CO settling in today? William appeared in the doorway. Their 3-month-old son settled comfortably and contentedly against his chest. Emily crossed the room and took the baby from him, breathing him in the way she still did every time, as though the fact of him had not yet fully become ordinary and perhaps never would. David William Anderson had inherited his father's clear blue eyes and his mother's capacity for warmth that announced itself before a single word was spoken. He's perfect, Emily said, pressing her lips to his forehead. Like his mother, William said quietly, and kissed her temple. Her parents were well. The return of Peterson Accounting had given David and Sarah far more than a balance sheet. It had given them back their purpose, their dignity, the thing her father had built with his own hands and had believed lost forever. The firm was flourishing again, her father energized in a way Emily hadn't witnessed since her childhood. The funds they had retained from the original settlement had provided the foundation to rebuild properly, and they had used every dollar of it wisely. Do you ever regret it? William asked, as he did occasionally, not from insecurity, but from a genuine desire to know. Staying. After everything that came to light, Emily looked at her husband, at their son, at the evidence visible in every corner of the space they had made together that they had built something lasting, something true, something entirely their own. Never, she said, and meant it without reservation. You proved that real love you choose with your eyes open, is worth more than anything that could have been handed to me. William put his arms around both of them and held his family close. What did you think of Emily and William's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below and rate it from 0 to 10. We'd love to read your score. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And for more stories like this one, they're waiting for you on the final screen.